You're probably wrong about a lot of things, and that's okay because so am I, so is everybody. But in science, that's a particular problem because a lot of misconceptions start to grow and spread, and before long, everyone's believing something wrong. So today, we're going to clear up 5 of these misconceptions and see how we get on. Let's do it. In films, cloning is seen as making like a brand new identical version of the person or animal being cloned. Quite often the process of cloning is obscured so that all you, the viewer, see is a fully formed human at the end of it. Whereas in reality, cloning is a complicated process. At the end of it, you're left with an embryo that contains identical DNA to the person or animal being cloned. In order for this embryo to turn into a person, it needs to be artificially implanted into a surrogate uterus and take a long time before it grows into a fully formed human. So you'll never have a situation where you have one original human and one clone. So sadly, that wonderful trope of shoot them, they're the clone, won't ever actually happen. Your brain does a lot of stuff. You need to be able to breathe and pump your blood around automatically. You need to digest your food. You need to regulate your temperature, salt levels, pH levels, blood glucose levels. You need to process information from the outside world. You need to regulate your emotions. You need to make sure you process. It's a lot. And yet somehow this myth pervades that we only use 10% of our brain. And if we could use the remaining 90% and unlock that potential and become superhumans.
Behold the power of Ultra Instinct!
However, using just 10% would leave us basically brain dead, and rather than being a fully cognitively aware human, you'd likely just be lying on the floor dribbling. Microwaves allow us to heat up our food quickly and to cook it with minimal loss of nutrients. They're pretty nifty. The microwave radiation is absorbed by the food, specifically the water, the sugars and the fats, and that transfers energy to it in the form of heat, warming up the food. But because of this word, radiation, people get concerned that their food might become radioactive, and radioactive substances are associated with developing cancer. Now, happily, microwave radiation is not ionizing radiation like ultraviolet, X-ray or gamma rays. That means that it doesn't have the same associated damage to cells that would lead to cancer. So while exposure to microwave radiation could cause damage if it were to be absorbed by the water, fats and sugars in our bodies, the actual radiation itself is contained within the microwave oven. It just reflects off within the surfaces and never actually comes out. These two usually come under the category of humans being stupid and ruining things. They are both effects involving the atmosphere, but they're two very different processes. Let's start with the ozone layer. Ozone is a compound found in the stratosphere between about 15 and 30 kilometers above our heads. It's a compound of oxygen and it's incredibly good at absorbing ultraviolet radiation. Remember how microwaves weren't ionizing? Well, UV is ionizing. And when we go outside in the sunlight, then it's the bit that gives us our suntans and our skin cancer. But there's a whole load of even more dangerous ultraviolet radiation that never reaches the surface, and that's because it's blocked by the ozone layer and stops us from getting exposed. If the ozone layer wasn't there, yes, it would be dangerous for humans, but also be dangerous for plants and other animals. In the past, human activity released a bunch of chemicals called CFCs, and that broke down the ozone, causing a hole in the ozone layer, which is currently above the Antarctic, where this more dangerous ultraviolet light can pass through. Now that hole is slowly recovering and the ozone regenerating as we banned CFCs from being released a few years ago, but it's still going to take several decades before it's entirely fixed. Now, greenhouse gases, for example carbon dioxide, are found much closer to the surface in the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases absorb a percentage of the heat from the sun and the earth, and then they re-emit that energy back to the earth's surface, warming it up, like a thick cozy blanket that helps keep us warm. Now, the greenhouse effect itself isn't a bad thing. Without it, then we'd be living in a perpetual ice age, as the planet would be an awful lot cooler. But it's the extra greenhouse gases that are being emitted that's increasing the percentage of energy that gets absorbed by the greenhouse gases and then released back to Earth, meaning that our temperature's obviously going ever higher. That was a long one. If you want a break before number 5, then mosey on down to the like button and give it a click. If you got this far, you probably have enjoyed the video and it helps keep me motivated to make more. Thank you. Before we dig into this last one, it's important to note that There's a lot of negative connotations and misconceptions associated with people with autism that are either grossly exaggerated or just flat out wrong. There is a conversation that needs to be had in society about how people with autism are treated, but today I want to focus purely on the misconception that there's a link between MMR vaccines and a child developing autism. So how did this misconception start? Well, in 1998, a group of researchers led by Andrew Wakefield published a study that suggested that certain negative behaviour traits associated with autism were linked to whether or not those children had had an MMR vaccine or not. And almost immediately some parents stopped vaccinating their children against some very dangerous and life-threatening diseases. And because of this, the studies came under an awful lot of scrutiny. It turns out that the research only collected information from 12 children, and their methodology was really quite poor, and the conclusions that they came to speculative. They made connections where there weren't really any. And some research was then carried out that immediately discredited this link. 10 of the original authors retracted their statements saying that there was not enough evidence to prove the conclusion that they were making. And then it turned out that Andrew Wakefield was being funded by some lawyers who were working for some people who were very much against vaccines. And then it turns out that they hadn't gone through the necessary ethical clearances that are required when carrying out research on children. Wakefield and his colleagues were found guilty of picking and choosing which bits of evidence they wanted to use, solely using the bits that supported the conclusion that they wanted. The article, the paper, was completely retracted by The Lancet, the journal where it was published, and Andrew Wakefield was struck off the medical council and banned from practicing medicine in the UK. So yeah, vaccines don't cause autism. So misconceptions are everywhere, and hopefully I've been able to clear up a few of them. If you know some other misconceptions that people hold that are clearly false, then let me know down in the comments. And if you want to watch another video about another misconception people have about scientists and how they work, then you can watch the next video right there. Bye.